So I know that I was supposed to be interviewing someone else. I forget who they were right now, but Mr. Rolento, Mr.A, a bunch of different names, many ninjas, told me the other day that he would have been able to chat with me a bit today, and so I've got him in because that was too good of an opportunity to miss. Because Bia mentioned you a few times, and even though you haven't been at MFG that long, apparently you've been on Mugen for a long ass time. So I had to get you on this thing. And my first question to you, sir, is how did you find out about Mugen? Like, where did it all begin?
All right, trying to think back because I have to think back to the DOS days here. Basically, by the time I originally found the engine, well, first I didn't actually know it was an engine. The first thing I actually found it by was actually as a Dragon Ball Z kind of a compilation set up there. Now that I think about it, it wasn't actually up of even a M.U.G.E.N website as much as an emulation site, which brought this thing up. And it was just one of those generic emulations, I believe Hispanic one off the top of my head, where you had your mishmash of your Super Budokan sprites, your hyperdimension, and not a real care because everything basically felt the same, but you had your Dragon Ball Z characters playing there. And it wasn't until digging a little deeper there and seeing other versions of the compilations that I kind of figured out, oh, this is actually a fighting game engine and kind of work things out there. And around that area, it was not the very first DOS build, but it was probably either the second or third, give or take.
Yeah, I pretty much ran into a similar scenario. Like the first time I saw when it was like Dragon Ball Z versus Marvel, and the X-Men characters were huge, and the Dragon Ball Z characters like beam attacks did like 1,000 hits or whatever, and it was really goofy. But yeah, it'd be like that apparently. So your first character is kind of lost to history, and pretty much a lot of your work is, it seems. But if you could remember a wee bit about this first character, what was it?
In order to just kind of qualify that, the first character I can recall more or less completing, such as it was actually back during the era when a lot of us were still trying to get graphics out of, and I use the term graphics very loosely, I should say, out of games that didn't have a proper emulation setup, such as the Street Fighter 3 games, namely Double Impact and Third Strike. So the only way you could get graphics out of these games, or something like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 at the time, was through the very ugly, laughable method of TV tuners.
Like Rio
So
in.
yeah, basically, when I was doing it, it was the same period, give or take, as when he set up his cable. Only the graphics I was able to get because I had an S video output set up for the Dreamcast I had handy was slightly better in quality, not as blurry.
Hmm.
It really depended. The best what you could get out of it at the time really defined or really depended on the kind of hardware that you just happened to have handy. I didn't exactly have top end stuff, but it was still better than what Ryo had handy on him at the time. So it was working with that, slowly trying to clean the background out and basically all the stuff around, which is when Street Fighter 3 era Goki was set up back in the day. It not only did it really, honestly, if we look back at it, not only did it look like shit, it played like shit too, if I'm going to be totally honest there. But it was probably the first one from that particular era, so that was kind of a thing.
Well, I mean, you guys were literally the first ones out on the field. We definitely weren't going to expect gold for sure, and a lot of us probably take that for granted now. But things weren't so nice back then.
Like people forget is like we have all these open source packs and easy sprite ripping tools, and of course people that just basically disassemble graphic files like day zero or day one or two in the most. Back then, you were lucky if you were able to work out a proper setup with Bleem and play your PlayStation 1 versions of these various Capcom fighters in order to get your graphics out that way, and manually edit out things as you need them in order to get your hit sparks and stuff out of the way.
Yikes. So, why did you go with Goki? Like, what did you like about him?
Generally, I actually played a lot of Street Fighter Alpha games prior to going to the Street Fighter 3 series.
Hmm.
And usually he was my go to character for the most part. So it's like, okay, since I'm already familiar with that, and I ended up playing a decent chunk of Double Impact and Third Strike, it's like, I figured it's like, I want to do something different, but at least start with something that I was at least somewhat familiar with in terms character wise. So kind of started out coding these large AVI files, trying to get as much frame data as I could, and I use that term very loosely.
Yeah.
As much frame data, edit things out using like I think it was virtual dub is what I was using in order to go frame by frame in order to kind of get something that I would hope I come into a workable frame that I can clean up just barely enough in order to use it and do that for the main character sprites themselves or main character frames, the effects, which were a haphazard mess even more than the characters frames themselves, and just hope I can somehow fit this within a palette setup, which was ugly as sin. All the different palettes were basically just me probably going into something like Paint Shop Pro and tinting things and hoping for the best. They try to get them to look like what they were supposed to.
Yeah. So besides the obvious things of what you explained, what was the biggest like challenge you kind of faced with all that? Like from a coding point of view, I guess we can go there since you didn't cover that.
The coding point of view for that particular one is I had no idea what the hell I was doing. That was still during an era where you obviously had the docs handy at that point, but you didn't exactly have so much of an open source library, so to speak. That didn't come till many years later. So you're kind of looking around, hoping you can find something loosely that you could refer to. Not copy, of course, because as you probably heard Vans mention in a previous interview there, copying stuff was a big no-no at the time. But you basically can kind of look to see what's going on there and try to logic your own way out in order to make something that's at least workable and kind of set up your own way.
Wow.
And hope for the best.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to be a common theme. The unrequestable era, I was probably on the tail end of that, honestly. Like, for all the beef that I had with people who were against it, like, looking back, I kind of get the point. Like, it kind of needed to be open source just a little bit to get the creativity and at least knowledge on what people needed to do to make things work properly. So let's assume that you have this character right now, and that this is the first time you're playing with it, and you see that it's made by some guy from way back when. If you're reviewing this character, what would you say about it right now?
Gameplay wise, that it probably played like total crap for one, if I'm going to be totally honest on it. And graphic wise, is I'd have to understand that yes, it technically was before widespread emulation of Dreamcast was the thing, but it still honestly looked terrible. Visually, is like I'd give myself maybe a sticker that says "You tried." That's about it. I don't claim that it was very good at all. It just happened to be one of the first ones, if not the first one.
Yeah.
And basically, that's kind of what the thing was for a lot of creation back then. It's not even that you were trying to make the best thing for a lot of people. It's that you were trying to be first. That was unfortunately kind of a common thing back then. Trying to be first, or if there are enough of them, trying to one up the next guy.
I think a bit of that is still in me now because a lot of shit that I do is me being that way. Like, well, this doesn't exist, or whoever did it before didn't do it that well, so I'm gonna do this. I feel like I'm a product of an era I was never a part of because of it. So the community, I've heard it from 3 different angles at this point now. But back then, like, what was it like to you?
All right, I'm trying to think of the best way to kind of cut this up because technically I'm remembering bits and pieces from multiple parts of the era, or eras, I should really say.
Go in depth as you want.
All right, so if we're going closer to the beginning that I can remember the bits and details about, obviously you had your earlier version of M.U.G.E.N Guild at that point, which basically kind of a more kind of loosely associated setup than it is now even. Basically, you still had your large request section. That was probably one of the main draws for their particular form at the time. In terms of the unrequestable stuff and all that stuff, it didn't particularly exist there, or at least it wasn't nearly as enforced as it was on like something on the EasyBoard dev forum, basically the EasyBoard version of M.U.G.E.N dev, when it was still on the free servers, before it moved on to Shin M.U.G.E.N servers at that point. And for the most part, the more common theme is like, one, there was already kind of the whole idea of basically the kind of passive aggressive setup of code reference or code copying is what mostly people had an issue with. To be honest, it seems absolutely pointless in hindsight, considering you really need something to refer to. You're not even inventing the code that you're setting up. It's all based on a common language, which there's only so much room you can work with without inadvertently one way or another referring to someone else or kind of hitting the same conclusion someone else has.
Right.
But generally, it was kind of looked as a general no-no when you looked in there and you found literally the same code, basically just dragged and dropped into someone else's file in order to just get it working with minimal effort. Generally, people kind of frowned upon that.
They still do,
They still do. But it's just generally, it was considered, it's like, at least have the courtesy to try to ask first. If you asked a lot of people back then, of course you're going to have some people who are kind of a pain in the ass and would say no about it. But for the most part, most people actually said yes if you asked nicely enough.
And I'm one of those people still. Like, I can't really enforce the fact that I still often say, like, well, I'm kind of closed. Like, to me, like, even with the tools that I've been given, I know that I've done a lot of things that I've really not seen done before or done properly. So, like, I want people to use it, but at the same time, I want them to know that I was responsible for it, because I put a lot of detail into things. And that's why I'm like, just ask me. I'm probably going to say yes. Like, It feels like more of a sign of respect than anything.
It's respect, courtesy. That was never the problem. It was just how messily enforced it was that kind of made things really bad, and that's what basically was the cause of a lot of messes back then.
Yeah, that was pretty easy to imagine, like, especially like with M.U.G.E.N Infantry, which is where I started, and looking back, that place was, boy, but
It was funny. I found it very funny.
it was definitely that. So, at that time, who did you ask for help with anything that you had issues with, or could you even?
Well, there are probably a handful of people there. Probably, I know I would have been referring to some people like Tenshin, who pretty much was known as pretty much kind of the de facto version of a few characters that are set up there, including generally his Rolento is still honestly one of my favorite setups for that particular character. Probably would have been talking to someone like Koga or Kogazan, however you want to pronounce it, since he had multiple versions or iterations of that name at the time. Probably Neogoki loosely. Didn't exactly talk to him too much back then. More after the fact now. A bit of Sander while he was around, and there's definitely a bunch of other names which I am completely forgetting off the top of my head, just because we're literally digging at some points names that I haven't had to say or mention or think about or handles in like a decade plus.
Well, that's why we're here. And honestly, if you can track them down, they're not safe either.
In terms of the people I can think of that are still around in some form or have comment or have at least I have some touch with, you probably have Neogoki, who's around somewhere. I imagine Beatrice already mentioned him. He doesn't exactly want to talk too much about the engine. He's basically past that point, and he's off doing his own thing and trying to buff himself up, because I imagine at this point, from the looks of it, he's trying to fill in an extra part in a live action Chowaniki video game movie or something like that. At least that looks the part.
Wow, that's cool. So, what would you tell someone who said, "Hey, I want to start working with M.U.G.E.N today"? Like, what are the things that I should know? What would you tell them?
First, I would laugh. Very first thing I would do is laugh. Then, in a more serious note, I would actually, first of all, suggest trying to point them through to some tutorial stuff. In this case, Guild actually does have a lot of resources at this point, which would be helpful. Basically, show them or point them towards something like tutorial, the help section there. Definitely the code library, because let's be honest, if you're starting off, you kind of don't have an idea what's going on there. Actually, before I even do that, tell them to read the docs. If they can read and understand that, then everything else starts making a little more sense. You really just need to get a general gist of how these things are supposed to work. Take a look. I would say normally take a look at KFM, but honestly, KFM is not well programmed. It's a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
It's like, use it as a bit of a basis, but then look at some of these other things to get an idea, to understand why we say it's a mess, and what you should really be looking for, comparing either a proper title, which you're trying to get some features of or emulate, or just generally concepts of good gameplay, really.
That covers it nicely, guys. People dive into this thing and don't really have a concept of how fighting games work. They just want to make their own character and make the name for themselves, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but they have to understand what they're dealing with, where it's just going to be nothing but bad news upon release, basically. But no one's perfect either. It is what it is. So, any last words you want to get out or say?
Well, first off, just in terms of the kind of to reiterate some of the stuff from the older stuff, I just want to make this perfectly clear for anyone who is listening and can listen, especially regarding those who were around during the older dev days. I just want to make it perfectly clear right now that, especially with all the banning, all the just general mess up there, the banning, and basically all that fun stuff in terms of administration, like, I'm not going to say it's 100%, but I'm going to say a good 80 to 90% of the stuff people used to complain about in terms of what the staff did, the admin staff, it was actually just Rabbi.
Wow.
Rabbi's kind of a son of a bitch that way. Fun guy. I still talk to him now.
Really?
90% of the stuff was probably Rabbi just stirring shit up.
Okay. I got some fuel for him now then.
It's like, he admits it freely. It's like, yeah, he jokes about it. He's like, yeah, I actually kind of feel bad you guys got the blame for it. Like 90% of the stuff, that was me. That's why we say the Rabbi did it. Because it was him most of the time, it feels like.
Interesting.
Okay. Additionally, I'm surprised you honestly didn't ask anything about the whole M.U.G.E.N fiasco.
Well, that was up to you to say, because that was a part of the community that you were more of than me. Like, I was around the last maybe 4 years before when M.U.G.E.N was prominent. I mean, not M.U.G.E.N, but 1.0 was prominent. So you were there from the beginning.
All right. Okay, let me try to remember the bits and pieces. I apologize if I do butcher a few details. Like I said, I'm trying to reach on something years back at this point, and the caffeine has worn out at this point of the day. So generally the gist of the whole original When M.U.G.E.N thing is basically they had Electbyte, or at least the original Electbyte, had been trying to work on setting up a Windows port for a while. They sent out a very limited version of the engine there. Basically, it could only run 2 characters, very limited in terms of the features that are available. Basically, it was just kind of a engine test of sorts, which I don't know who, no one exactly knows. Someone leaked it out to the public. Electbyte, that president at the time, took it pretty badly because they basically disappeared after that point, among other things. So that left a very out of date engine that, as obviously the Windows versions were updating, was becoming harder and harder to actually run properly. But at some point, some people managed to get a hold of the original limited demo, get it out there, and some people started hacking the limits out of it. So you could actually add more characters than the one or two that you had available, start getting the other modes to start working. Functionality was a bit of a thing. It wasn't exactly the most reliable one, but it's something that could work on, at the time, current consoles and current PCs, which is kind of a step up there. So a little later than that, someone basically, M.U.G.E.N, I want to say is the username I can think of off the top of my head, basically finished the job of tearing the thing open and basically opening it up, so we got the M.U.G.E.N that most of us know, the M.U.G.E.N hack. So the people, of course, at the dev administration did figure that out, and we were kind of talking amongst ourselves, since we already figured out there and figured it's only a matter of time before someone leaks this thing anyway. Do we own this thing, or do we just try to shy it away and put it back in the closet, so to speak, and pretty much kind of quiet it off? Which, of course, at the end, we didn't have the option to, because our main concern is we figured some people from M.G.E.N would end up leaking it anyway. And wouldn't you know it, they did anyway. Before we even finished the conversation, it's like they actually leaked the damn things themselves, just as we were figuring out. So at that point, it's like, well, cat's out of the bag at this point. So we own it? Yep. So at that point is when we decided, basically, it's like, okay, because we basically had an engine otherwise that it's dead and dying, and you have something that you can't really use because DOS support was basically getting killed off at that point. It's like, okay, fine. Because we don't have anything else, and basically there is no Electbyte at this point, in order to keep things running a little bit, fine. Here it is. We all know it's out. Here's a more direct link to it. If anyone wants to use it, it's basically, we're not going to say anything about it. We just let it go, let it proceed. It's a thing now.
And it's funny how history kind of repeated itself with 1.1 even. Like, I don't want to just make it seem like Electbyte kind of was more optimistic in the community than I would be, but I'm like, you can't just give that out to everybody and then say we don't want you to give it out. This is the internet. Like, 10 years ago and now, not much has changed in terms of people like, oh, I'm going to give this to everybody because everyone should have it anyway. It's not that it's a respect thing, but it's more of them saying, I think everyone should have it now, even though they're like, but it's not finished. It happens everywhere, so I was kind of shocked that they try to do it again.
I don't imagine this current one is exactly the same group, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's like maybe they have one or two of the original programmers around, but basically, no, it's got to be a new group. And clearly they didn't learn the lessons of the old group. And at this moment, I believe they've disappeared again.
Yep.
All right, as long as it's clear, history repeats. That's how it works.
Yep. Just makes me wonder 10 years from now when M.U.G.E.N 2.0 comes about, if they're going to learn anything again. And at that point, I'll be in my 30s and probably done, hopefully. I mean, I only got like 40 some characters left because I decided I wanted to do 150 because I've clearly lost my mind years ago.
I can't tell you whether you've lost your mind or not. I dress up as a ninja, do video game playthrough videos. I can't judge.
Well, I would still say dedicating yourself to something that no one really cares about and no one really cares about what you're doing is arguably worse. But that is equally out there. Either way,
I blame the caffeine abuse.
Definitely, probably a factor. I don't know. I don't drink coffee, so I'm just insane. Thanks for coming by. It was kind of short notice for both of us, to be honest, but we managed to pull this thing through, and I'll definitely be able to get this one out a lot faster, hopefully. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to want to hear about the administration of back then and see how many pitfalls that we're dealing with now was already a thing long ago. Thanks for coming by, man.
No problem. It's been fun.